Hello and welcome to another installment of At the Podium with me, Patrick Huey. At the Podium is a platform where we will learn from people who come from different walks of life, careers, and experiences, but all share one thing in common. They have stepped fully into the transformative power of saying yes to the unexpected turns of their lives. And they are now using the power of their voice, or a podium, to make an impact on the world we live in today. At the Podium is the intersection of art, culture, and big thoughts wrapped up in good old-fashioned conversation. Today, I'm thrilled and humbled to share the podium with Bandhu. Pun has acted on Broadway, off-Broadway, and throughout the regions. He has guest starred on TV series including FBI, Gotham, Blind Spot, Madam Secretary, Difficult People, NCIS New Orleans, and Orange is the New Black, among many others, with recurring roles on Blue Bloods and One Life to Live. He can be seen in the Academy Award-nominated films Michael Clayton, Burn After Reading, and Can You Ever Forgive Me, among others. He recently played Deputy Attorney General John Yoo in The Torture Report, starring Adam Driver and Annette Bening, now streaming on Amazon. He is the recipient of the Colorado Theater Guild's Henry Award for Best Supporting Actor and New Dramatist Bowden Award. Pun is also an award-winning producer through his shingle, Zindog Productions, which produces plays and films, as well as an advocate for inclusion, receiving an Obie Award in 2020 as a co-founder of the Asian American Performers Action Coalition, which publishes the Visibility Report, the only publicly available annual study of racial representation on New York City stages, which Pun co-authors. In 2019, he was selected as a nominator for the Tony Awards, and he also serves on the board of advisors for the Yale School of Drama, where he was a graduate of the acting program. Pun, welcome to At the Podium.
Where Patrick was also a graduate of that program. Hey, Patrick, so good to see you.
What's up, Pun? How are you?
Oh, I'm well, as well as can be during these crazy, crazy times. So many things have changed, and the industry obviously is still trying to get its feet, right now as we speak, Broadway and theater has not come back yet, but we're hopeful.
So Pun, so over the course of this podcast, this show, I've talked to some people that you would know. I've talked to Regina Bain, Adrian Carter, and with them, we really focused on how they made a career shift or a life shift that took them on a new pathway that they were not prepared for or that was unanticipated. And we sort of discussed how they navigated those transitions. But you have kept your foot very much in the performing world, but you're also a very accomplished producer. So let's talk about that, because longevity as an actor is not an easy feat to accomplish as beautifully as you have, particularly for people of color, where roles and the best of those times are limited. So how have you navigated that?
It's so interesting. I know. I guess longevity is an accomplishment in itself. Just I'm holding on. But how have I accomplished that? I think just by having great training and by continuing to do training. Also, it's about pivoting. To your point about how limited the opportunities are for actors of color. When I graduated from Yale, I would say like maybe about 40% of my auditions all required an Asian accent. It was so different than sort of, at Yale, we were asked we were put into all different types of roles, the entire gamut, of the human experience. And it was all colorblind casting. And so it was kind of a shock to really graduate and see how pigeonholed the industry was, that there were only certain types of roles that were available to me, mostly foreigners, mostly, immigrants, sort of the other, nerds, geeks, engineers, doctors, lawyers, certainly, but not McDreamy roles, not the cool doctors that you fall in love with, or that actually progress the emotional heart of the story, but, doctors that sort of progress the plot along, but they were always sort of on the periphery. And I always like to say that, I'm not a supporting character in the story of my life. Look, I can't complain. I worked consistently doing those small peripheral roles. And I yearned for the things that were creatively fulfilling. And so that's actually what led me to producing. I actually formed an off Broadway theater company with Yale School of Drama grads modeled after the Yale Cabaret at school.
Can you explain what the Yale Cabaret is?
It's sort of like the life force at Yale, sort of like where most of our training was based and steeped in, Shakespeare and Chekhov and a lot of the new work that the playwrights were writing, of course. But when you think of cabaret, you think of songs, but that wasn't really the case. It was like every single week there was a different play. There might be musicals, there might be a dance piece. It really ran the gamut, and it was all student run, and that was the key. In that everything was done by the students, and it was all extracurricular. That was also where lighting designers got a chance to act, and costume designers got a chance to direct. There were no lines, and that's also where some of the most exciting and creative times in theater were, at least in my 3 years.
So you took that to New York to replicate that off Broadway.
Yeah, because I was looking for an artistic home, and actually, as much as we talk about the Yale Mafia, there really wasn't one to speak of. There wasn't like a creative center where we could like inspire each other. And that's sort of what I hungered. That's what I missed most about school and having those types of conversations. And so we created a hub, and it lasted for about 3 years. But during that process, it taught me, I became sort of similar to what we were saying about how the costume designer can become, an actor, and everyone does everything. That to me is what producing is, and it was that being part of that team that created these shows, which we actually got an Indie Theater Award for actually in our first year, which was kind of fantastic for an unknown theater company. But, you had to do everything from setting the lights to sweeping the floors, and that's my definition of what a producer is. You just have to do everything. And so part of that was I became the marketing director, really reaching out and trying to create sort of to reach out to the Yale School of Drama community in New York. I became, the press person, learned how to write a press release. And it was at that point that I realized, wow, I'm actually really good at this, and I really enjoy doing it, putting on a show for people and getting butts in seats. And I started doing other things as well. I created an Asian American film festival to try to get more Asian American stories out there. Then my partner, now my husband, actually found himself out of a job. He was in finance at the time. And he was like, don't think I'm copying you, but I've done a lot of meditating, and I think what I want to do is something more creative, and I think producing might be something that sort of marries, my skill set with what I'm yearning for. And I was like, great, fantastic, let's join forces, and we formed a production company. That was in 2004, and we were newbies, we knew nothing, and so we actually we decided to take the Commercial Theater Institute CTI program, and through that we met some Broadway producers who gave us the opportunity, if we wanted to come on board. And so that's how the producing thing happened.
You're being incredibly humble, because you actually have 2 Tony Awards for your producing.
Yeah.
And so I'm cracking up, because you're like, yeah, this little producing thing that I did that happened to give me a couple of Tony Awards throughout my career. That's massive, pun. Because we were not trained to do that. Part of the academy is that, you kind of stay in these lanes that you're sort of put into, and directors direct and actors act. And you kind of you blurred those lines to find your way into this whole other expression.
Yes, I did.
Why are you so humble about that? Come on.
Why am I humble about it? I'm humble about it because, like you say, you call it saying yes to the opportunity, and to me, it was just sort of an extension of a bunch of kids coming together to put on a show, sort of a let's do it in the barn, mentality. What movie was that? Was that like a?
It was like a Judy Garland movie.
A Judy Garland movie, right?
I think so.
Right, because Mickey Rooney was in it. Yeah. Anyways, of people, and you're right, like where everyone would be able to do everything, and it is interesting because I mean, maybe this is related to sort of the pigeonholing in the industry. It makes sense, of course, that everyone specializes in something. When I was a kid, I could just throw a cape on myself and I was Superman, right? But like in a professional arena, you need specialists. But there's also, I think, a lot of divisions and boundaries where it is a lot of like, it is about staying in your lane because so much of your visibility or your notoriety is based on sort of your branding, right? What is it that you do? Even in casting, right? I mean, that's why there's a lot of pigeonholing. People need to know, what is it that you bring to the table? Are you a character actor? Are you a leading man? Are you, I don't know. I've always had a problem with that because I've always wanted to do it all. But also, I think that none of us are one thing at any given time. And so when you take that into sort of these areas of specialization, it can be really difficult. Actually, like I'll tell you, I actually achieved so much success as a producer so quickly that it was so much sexier than being an actor. Like someone hears that you have 2 Tony Awards as a producer and automatically they stop thinking of you as an actor. There's something about the hierarchy-ness of things that we insert into things, and it's like when you first meet people, it's immediately like one of the first questions people ask is, what do you do? Or they don't ask, what do you do, they'll like within 5 minutes they'll ask sort of like where you went to school, or there's all these sort of coded questions that allows people to understand sort of where you are in this hierarchy of things. How much do I need to respect you? What can you do for me?
Well, I
Right.
was going to say it's that. And I am, even now, we're 20 years plus, 20 years past graduate school. And when I'm in New York, it happens in New York a lot. The first thing people ask me, where'd you go to school? It's really fascinating.
It's sort of America's class system in a way,
Yeah.
right? Class is so prevalent and forward in America in really subtle ways sometimes, which can make it more pervasive and insidious. But even though I never gave up acting, people thought I did, and I had to sort of reassert I'm primarily an actor, in that I might wear multiple hats, but I am primarily an actor. That is what I do. And I actually had to take a step back a little bit from producing, but I had to remind people that I was an actor. I had to go do a lot of regional theater shows, and it wasn't until I booked a couple of off-Broadway shows that sort of my visibility as an actor got back on track, or the track that I wanted it to be on. It surprised me actually that people were so that people don't deal well with hyphenates. A friend of mine gave me really good advice, which was, Pun, why give them any other reason to think of you than anything other than a good actor?
You would think in an artistic environment that we wouldn't be limiting people's forms of expression, that we would want people to have a myriad, and you can have myriads of ways of expressing yourself, and that at different times, based upon different situations, you have to express yourself differently. You wear different hats. I don't know why we're so intent on putting people in these very strict categories.
Yeah, to express yourself differently. Yeah, it is part of that same impulse. It's interesting, how people are not able to see more than one thing at a time. And I think that actually that carries over to many things. I think it carries over to, um, I do some corporate training as well, using acting methodologies actually, whether that's sort of like forum theater as a platform to discuss some of these diversity issues, or sometimes even one-on-one sort of role playing to give these managers a chance to practice and try out different tactics of communication. It's always fascinating to me that a lot of these people always think of themselves as one thing. I'm introverted, or I am INTJ, like people, I think actors understand that people are multifaceted, like I might be introverted in one setting, but extroverted with other people, and or I might be forced to have to be to seem extroverted. And so in the act of performing, that is in itself an act of becoming, and we're constantly expanding ourselves. Like I can play the Dalai Lama and I can play Pol Pot, and maybe I shouldn't have reduced myself to two Asian examples, but yeah, I did it again. I trapped myself, right? We constantly trap ourselves in sort of these prisons that people put on ourselves, right? You're
Mm.
Asian, so this is what you should do. So I think part of that is sort of releasing that, I don't like to use the term minority because minority means less than, but it's minority thinking. And I do feel like we are making ourselves smaller by not being able to see the true dimensionality of who we are. There are all these archetypes, right? And so much of being a good actor is about inhabiting someone as a real life person to make it seem real and three-dimensional.
Yeah.
But even then, we're so trapped by formula that I think that now is a really exciting time, actually, especially in TV, because we're trying to explode all of those archetypes and narratives and storylines, and we want. I think there's a true craving for originality, and so it's a different time now, I think, than it was pre-pandemic.
I think that sort of exploding of the archetype is happening artistically, but I think it's happening in the world right now. I think people are tired of these we all carry the weight of history. We all carry the weight of these archetypes that we were born into that may or may not represent who we really are as people. And I think that's part of what's happening right now is that there's this breaking of these archetypes, these held beliefs that, oh, well, if you're Black, that means you're going to play basketball when you go to college, if you even go to college. And if you're Asian, that means you're very smart and you're going to work at NASA. And if you're a woman, you're going to have 3 kids and they're going to be the center of your life. Like, I think we're breaking all of these archetypes to say, what are we really? What do we really want as individuals, as a nation, as a world? It's impacting everything that we do. You see it in the younger kids today. Younger kids don't have these preconceived ideas of who they can be or what they can do. And it's a very exciting, and I think in some ways maybe even a dangerous time, because the tropes are all just flying or just breaking apart right now, which is amazing. Tell me about Pun, the teenager, Pun, the young man before I met you at school. How did you even get to this point?
Well, Pun the teenager had just recently moved to America from Indonesia. I actually was born in Jakarta and I lived there for 13 years. And I went to an international school that actually had a fantastic drama program and incorporated the arts into every single aspect of the curriculum. So I was doing like puppet shows in kindergarten, and there was always like a play or a production for me to be part of. But when I moved to New Jersey at the age of 13, it was sort of a big culture shock for me, and I felt like people didn't really see me. It was really weird to suddenly come to America, and we first moved to Forest Hills, Queens for 6 months. And that was such a culture shock for me to go into the cafeteria and see all the Black kids were sitting at one table, all the Asians were at another table, all the white kids were at another table. The divisions that exist in this culture. And I think that is related to what we're talking about in terms of pigeonholing, right? And so I ate my emotions and I became really fat. And I was still involved in like drama. Theater was sort of like the release for me, where I could also sort of surprise people, where like the nerdy fat kid could also, like dance really well in the musical number, or, like they were able to see a different side of me. And I loved surprising people that way. It was sort of like my way of saying, haha, you don't really know who I am. And then I went to college at Washington University in St. Louis, which was a fantastic experience. Was able to find myself and open up myself in so many ways. I think that so much of my life up to that point had been about, in many ways, sort of, my artistry was about putting on masks and pleasing others and sort of transforming for others. At the same time, I sort of lost the core underneath it all. I think my journey as an actor, or yeah, as an artist, has been about constantly sort of paring everything away and revealing the truth of things and sort of who I am underneath it all. And I think one of the best classes the most transformative class I took at Yale was Chris Bay's clown class.
Can you tell us what the clown class was?
This particular type of clown work, Chris's clown work, was very much based on truth. Chris always said that your clown, everyone has one clown, one essential clown, and your clown is the person you would be if no one had ever said no to you in your life. Just imagine what that would be like. You would grow up to become your true authentic self in a way, and it was difficult so like through all these different exercises and stuff, I was able to find my clown. His name is Wally.
I remember.
And Wally was this like scared, very vulnerable, very open child of the universe, basically, that like walked so cautiously, on the earth, and would be scared of the audience. The closer he got to the audience, the more he would be scared of them, which would make them laugh because of that truth. And I completely rejected Wally. When Chris was like, "That's your clown," I was like, "That is not me." I'm a confident person and I'm extroverted. I'm social. That's not how I wanted to be seen. As someone who was weak, someone who was, sensitive. And once but then I learned to love Wally, and his gentleness and the beauty that he found in people, in the world, and that could move him to tears, and how that actually was funny, and it was essentially who I was, and it made sense actually, like throughout my life, I process things really slowly. I think, like I tend to sort of be the person who is not talking all the time, who is listening, who is observing, who tries to understand different perspectives. In order to make big decisions, I usually like to talk to a lot of different people, or to see how other people did it. Or that's actually why that's one of the things that sort of like motivates me as an artist, is being part of a collaborative process. It's why putting on a show, with the Yale Cabaret folks, like that was stimulating, because it was a group of people deciding together sort of like how are we going to do things, or so anyways, so that has been my journey, I think, as an actor since that point, is to find the truth of things. Once I understood sort of the essential core of who I was at the bottom, at the core, then I also understood all these layers of social upbringing that we layer on ourselves. And you say that, it's different now for the younger generation, but it's still, all that coded messaging is still there in many ways. You understand sort of like what it means to be a man in this world, and how you adapt to this mold that might not be you necessarily, but once you're able to peel away those layers and understand the essential being underneath, then you're also able to put on other layers of character, and transform fully into someone like a Hitler. But as long as your core is still inhabiting those layers, it's truthful. It's how you would be Hitler. And so like it's that artistic process has been so fulfilling for me.
It's interesting how that you say that, because I'm working on a book, and part of what we're talking about is, in order to be successful, you have to know who you are. You have to sort of strip away all of the artifice that we learn to create to survive.
Mm-hmm.
And then once you do that, then it becomes up to you to create the narrative that you want to express in the world, which is very much tied to a lot of what our acting training was. It's like, you can do anything you want to do. You can be whatever character you want to be, but you have to start with the essential who is the person sitting in the chair, the three-dimensional pun, Patrick, who is that real person without all of the encumbrances that our parents, our society, our fears give us. Which I think is kind of the brilliance of Chris Bay's The Clown Class, was because there were two things I remember in that class pun that really struck me. One was he took away our faces. He made us wear those ridiculous red noses. Do you remember? And the minute he did that, he took away our faces. So our identity as we looked in the mirror was completely shot.
Totally.
So you know what I mean? So that I thought that was brilliant, that he took away the thing that we so identified with in that program, what we look like. He took that away. And then I don't know if you remember this day, and to give a more color around this, the program is incredibly exhausting. And Chris Bayes' class was on Saturday at like noon. So we were in class 6 days a week, and the last day was this really intense emotional class. But do you remember that day he said to us, I want you all to go back to when you were 5 years old and pick up that thing that you dropped on the side of the road so that you could exist in the world today, and go pick up that thing and bring that back with you today. Like those two things I thought were revolutionary.
Absolutely. I mean, you talk about authenticity. This applies everywhere. And I see it in the workplace as well, in the corporate workplace, where, people think that they have to act a certain way in order to get results, right? And in order to be the manager in the room, you have to be the smartest in the room. You have to be the loudest voice. Sometimes if you don't get your way, maybe it's effective to get angry and stressed out. And sometimes that we see these things sort of repeated as sort of oh, that's effective management, and those are the people that get promoted. It's so effed up, sort of how those traits get confused with being an effective manager, when really those people are not as efficient at creating a workplace environment where everyone can profit and thrive and be their best selves. I see it all the time with these men who are they usually, okay, I'll ask them sort of what's a difficult conversation that you would like to practice or have, and it might be yeah, I'm having this problem with my junior, she's just not able to do this. And I was okay, well, I will be her, tell me a little bit about her. What's one adjective that describes her? And then I'll transform so we can have this conversation. And I'm just responding to what he's giving me in the moment, right? Like an actor, right? Like if he speaks things in a certain tone, then that's going to make me respond in a certain way. And so I'm just responding truthfully to how I, pun, would sort of respond to someone talking to me that way or whatever. And inevitably, 100% of the time, these managers are all you said you did exactly what she would do. You became her, I was I was just doing what anybody would do in those situations. And so there's this light bulb moment that goes off in their heads where they realize that they thought they came in here to talk about a problem that they were having, but actually almost always, to a fault, the problem is them. The problem is their communication style, and giving them a safe space where they can flex their style and try something else. I feel like I'm giving them the best therapy in the world. Suddenly they realize how they can save their marriages, or or everyone has the capability of, I was how would you talk to this person if they were autistic? Or how would you talk to this person if they were your 12-year-old daughter? So, and then and they completely transform. They're able to be empathetic and to connect and to listen, and all of these skills that are not necessarily valued in the workplace. And that's sort of what I'm saying in terms of, we're so multifaceted, but most people only focus on one thing that they do habitually again and again and again. When this manager suddenly becomes empathetic, suddenly he becomes such an effective manager, because it's more his authentic self. That authenticity is what people can sense it, and I think actually that's one of the keys for where that's why I've gotten to the place where I have. I love to listen to people and I love to hear where they're coming from. And occasionally, people will have ideas that inspire me that I've never thought of before. And putting yourself in a place where you're allowing the world to sort of inspire you, that's to me sort of like what propels me as an artist is creating work together with people. And I would not be able to do what I do if it was not for all the other artists that surround me and inspire me daily. Authenticity is absolutely number one. The reason for someone's success. I really do
And
think that.
you hit it. Dan Goleman, who does all this research on emotional intelligence and IQ, talks about empathy being the true indicator of a person's ability to be an effective leader, which is tied to emotional intelligence. That empathy piece is critical. How do you?
I think that's actually one of the reasons why all these people that you're talking about, Regina, Adrian, Bill, like we all come from the theater world. We all focused for so much of our lives on sort of understanding who we are as people and how we interact with others and understanding different perspectives and crawling into different perspectives and understanding empathy. And so that skill set, I was really surprised when I sort of started doing training in the corporate world, like how little there is of that, how
Yeah.
how difficult it is for people to do that, but things that come so naturally to us as artists, as culture makers. And so it doesn't surprise me that all these people have been able to find success outside of the field as well, because once you're able to, once you do that, once you care about other people, you're able to create relationships, and that's the basis of any business.
I think I've spent 20 years in the business world now, unbelievably, and that wasn't the plan, as you well know. But I think for so long, business was based around an ability to chop yourself off from the neck down. And so that you were not interfacing with your own emotions, or you were told not to. So
Right.
therefore, you couldn't understand a person who was coming to you with emotion. I see it more and more that we were expecting managers and leaders to be empathetic creatures and to be able to understand human dynamics versus this is the rule, this is what we're doing, suck it up or leave, which was, nobody ever said that explicitly, but it was definitely an implied way that business worked from what I witnessed. But I do see it shifting. I do see people trying to authentically connect with people, have real empathy and understanding for them. And we'll see how this, I think that explains a lot of the DE&I work that's happening within most companies now. They're really trying to understand, well, what is it like to be a transgender person working in this environment? Or what is it like to be an African American or an Asian person working in this environment? And what can we do to make that a better emotional experience for you? We don't expect you to leave that behind just because you're coming to work in this office. The world is shifting. I think all of these held beliefs that we had about what we do, who we are disintegrating. And it makes it I think we're all very uncomfortable right now because we don't know. We don't know what any of this leads to. We don't know what do we look like on the other side of it, of what's happening.
Right. And that's another reason I think why artists succeed so much, is because we are comfortable being uncomfortable. Like we're comfortable in chaos, right? It's about improv,
Right.
about being able to adapt in the moment. And sometimes, a lot of times, you don't have structure. Yes, there are things that HR can do to change the sort of the work environment in the corporate world, but beyond that, it also requires a structural change. And this is connected to the diversity work that I do as well, in that so often it's so difficult to create meaningful change without changing the structure,
Yeah.
and people will try to put a band-aid on things. You have all these organizations right now who are wringing their hands, these white-led organizations being like, how can we change? How can we be more diverse? We don't know what to do. And I call BS on that. if you don't know what you can do to create more diversity, to offer better recruitment and to create a more inclusive environment for your theater workers or for your employees or for everything, you're not paying attention. I think so often what happens is there's this band-aid, right? Where it's like, okay, we'll just hire more people of color. And you see that on Broadway as well. Like we've been tracking statistics on Broadway and the theater world and nonprofits as well for we have 12 years of data now, and you can see the uptick in the numbers, particularly in hiring of actors on stage, because that's what people see, right? While that's great, they're doing it by doing a lot of inclusive casting, but they're not fundamentally changing the structure. So they're hiring white writers to write predominantly white stories where the leads are all white people, and then they'll sprinkle in a lot of, the supporting character could be a person of color, or a lot of chorus people dancing, in the background will be people of color. And so overall, it seems like they're diverse, but things haven't really fundamentally shifted. The latest statistics we have are from the 18-19 season, which was the last full season before the season of the pandemic. And almost 2/3 of all roles on Broadway went to white actors. White actors were 80% of all lead roles and 90% of lead roles when you looked at plays only compared to musicals. This is like a year and a half ago. 94% of directors on Broadway were white. 100% of directors of musicals were white. Even shows that were about the experience of people of color. And things were better at the nonprofits. In fact, the nonprofits were the greatest engine of change. But even there, for every dollar spent on white actors, 71 cents were spent on people of color. And Asians were often overlooked, even for companies that were focusing on diversity, had some of the lowest percentages of hiring of Asians. We're talking about creating structural change. And so all these organizations that are hand-wringing, they don't understand that in order to create real meaningful change, you have to change the power dynamic completely, right? So that means that people of color have to be the artistic director, or they have to be on the board, or they have to be in positions of power. That's true for corporations as well. You see a lot of corporations shifting from what were primarily hierarchical organizations to now sort of a matrix organization where responsibility is shared. And what's so effective about those organizations is that you're empowering everybody. In a matrix organization, you're rewarded by constantly reinventing yourself and constantly networking and constantly helping, and being a connector for people and doing all those things that are entrepreneurial and are creative and infusing the entire company with innovation, where ideas are heard. And it can be more difficult, obviously. One of the reasons why sort of pounding the table and that style of management is so effective is because it's easier to be told what to do sometimes. Just like it's easier to sort of work for a company and have sort of an established role than it is to go out and create your own business, where you have to be very self-disciplined and there are no rules, so to speak, right? There are no guideposts. So I think that sort of matrix thinking is much more complicated, but it's also, and scary for people, but it's also how we essentially are as humans, how we work. We are complicated, we are multifaceted. And I think that we're moving away from sort of these linear lines, these rigid lines, right? Where everyone is now being asked to jump in and get your feet wet and start paddling, even if you don't know sort of where you're going.
Yeah, it's interesting you talk about the structure changing. I was reading a statistic, and I'll probably get the name wrong here, but I believe there are more CEOs named David than there are women CEOs, which is, it may have been John, David or John. Great people. I know David and John's great people, but there are more CEOs named David or John than there are women CEOs. And then when you throw in Black people, Asian people, Latin people, it's just the numbers drop down from there. So I do think structurally there has to be a shift. I think a lot of it too is pipeline, which, these types of jobs are pipeline jobs. Where'd you go to school? Wharton, Stanford, Yale, Harvard, Princeton, the schools are very, very specific that track you for these types of positions. So that gets into a whole other conversation about who has access to education and the debt that people have to go into to have those types of educations. But to your point, the structure has to change. I want to ask you.
I just a final point on that. Like the nonprofits have tried to do that much more, where even though like 100% of the artistic directors in the top 20 not-for-profits in New York are all white, they have started telling more culturally specific BIPOC stories and hiring BIPOC teams and creating more opportunity. It's so interesting, like all these amazing directors, for instance, that haven't directed in mainstream theater, but have been doing regional work, or, they're all such amazing directors and they're getting so many accolades and awards because the nonprofits are finally like trying to find people outside of the regular circles that they operate in. There's so much talent out there that is untapped. And that's true, I think, across industries. But what's great is that when they focused on actually telling more culturally specific stories, it does break apart that structure, so to speak, right? As opposed to what I was saying before about like hiring people of color to fit into a white story. When you tell stories that are relevant to people of color, then you create more opportunities. And also they're finding that, a lot of designers of color are now working because of that. And so it opens up this whole other world of opportunity that didn't exist before. So breaking down structures actually creates fundamental change.
What was the yes in your career that took the greatest leap of faith?
I think the greatest leap of faith I ever took was understanding that I needed to be an artist. I think especially for people that are multifaceted, who could do so many different things, it took me a while, but I had to listen to that person inside that said, you know what, I'll regret it for the rest of my life if I don't embark on this career path. And it's about eschewing safety and stability and really navigating the chaos and knowing that sort of even without a safety net, I have everything that I need to land on my feet, and I will find a way to make it happen if it's important enough to you.
Wow. Pan, thank you so much for your time today and your willingness to share your voice and wisdom with us. I'm beyond grateful to you. It's so good to see you, my friend. Guys, if you're watching or listening, remember, we all have a voice, so use yours wisely.